To give us a better understanding of the Ramirez case and its implications, we're joined now by Robert Dunham, Executive Director of the Death Penalty Information Center. Robert, welcome. Give us the backstory on this case. John Henry Ramirez wants a Christian pastor with him in the death chamber. Why is this controversial?
Well, it's controversial because Texas has changed its policy several times, and it's changed it in a way that prevents people from having religious guidance as they pass from this life to being executed. And you know, when we look at this, what we see is that Texas initially allowed its own pastors in the execution chamber. Then, when a Buddhist death row prisoner wanted a Buddhist priest, they said no. That case went up to the United States Supreme Court. A stay of execution was granted. They then decided, rather than discriminate on the basis of religion, they would ban religious advisors from the execution chamber altogether. And so Mr. Ramirez wants to have a pastor with him, and he has asked for the ability to have the pastor pray with him and to lay hands on him during the execution. And Texas said, well, we'll let the pastor in, but he's going to have to stand in a corner and be quiet.
And so the Supreme Court, as you mentioned, has dealt with this recently in the past couple of years, and they decided to move this case from the emergency docket or the death docket, where they usually deal with these emergency requests from prisoners, into the merits docket, turning it into a case that will change the law and can set precedent. Why does this matter? Well,
there's a lot of cases recently that the Supreme Court has decided in what's been called the shadow docket in emergency litigation. And typically, when something comes up to the court in an emergency setting, they don't get full briefing and they don't get oral argument. So they base the case on the briefs that they have in front of them at that particular time during the course of an emergency. The Supreme Court, since 2019, has never granted a stay of execution on any issue except for religious exercise in the execution chamber. And in those cases, what they would do is they would grant a stay, and then the state would change its policy so that the next prisoner coming up would not be in the same posture. And the Supreme Court would grant a stay again, and the state would change its policy again. This time, the Supreme Court said, okay, we are going to stay the execution, but we are going to schedule an expedited hearing. The stay was over the summer. The hearing is going to be November 1st. That's still pretty fast, but it is the first time that they have agreed to hear the merits of this issue and decide what the Constitution requires or what's required under the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act.
That's right, RLUIPA. And you've worked on these cases a long time. Is Texas the only state that doesn't allow for prayer in the death chamber?
No, and in fact, until very recently, this was never an issue at all. In 200 years of this country, we have not had religious liberty in the execution chamber as an issue before the courts. Most states, once executions moved indoors, most states routinely made it so that you would have a religious advisor stay with the person up until the time that he or she entered the execution chamber. Each state had its own law on who was allowed to be in the execution chamber, but most of the states didn't include a religious advisor. States like Texas and Alabama did, but they limited the religious advisor to state employees and to whatever religion they would be. So in Alabama, you could have a Christian chaplain. In Texas, you could have either a Christian chaplain or a Muslim imam, but you couldn't have anybody else. And it was when you had the first challenges based on defendants who were a different religion from the state-sponsored chaplain who was going to be available. That's when this became an issue.
So then why should people who care about religious liberty be watching this case very closely?
Well, this case will tell us probably more likely the contours of RLUIPA than the contours of the First Amendment. Congress in 2000 passed a law that prohibits religious discrimination in a variety of settings, and jails are one of them. departments of correction are one of them. If you believe in religious liberty, if you believe in the exercise of religion, you can't say it's just for me. It has to be something that's available and available equally to people of all faiths. And so if you are truly someone who cares about people having the opportunity to exercise their religious beliefs, you should care what happens. We are very sensitive in society as a whole with people who are about to die. Mm-hmm. That's what last rites are all about. And that should be no less of a concern when the cause of death is the government taking somebody's life.
Oral argument will be on November 1st. For us Catholics, All Saints Day. Thank you, Robert.